So the first thing I'm going to talk about is democracy, and I think it's no surprise to any of us that democracy, the formal kind of representative system, is failing the majority, and that an increasing number of people are feeling disconnected. Trust is declining in politicians, and people's sense of their ability to be able to influence the decisions which affect their lives every day is diminishing. So, and I think that's worth kind of interrogating a little bit in the context of this conversation and what we've just seen. Because what we're also seeing is the rise of corporate power. Like, there's corporations in our world, in many countries, and including, I would say, in Ireland, have a significant more power than an awful lot of even politicians and the formal system. And that's kind of, and with the demise of democracy, there's a direct connection with, I think, what's happening with civil society and what has happened over the last kind of 20 years, where the independence and the autonomy and the ability of civil society to be able to critique and hold decision makers to account has diminished vastly. And very often what we're seeing is the people that organisations and communities which organisations in civil society are working with see themselves more in a service role as opposed to in a facilitative or an empowering role, where creating conditions for people to be able to engage with decision makers. I suppose just to kind of pick up on Trump and Brexit, I would say that anybody who isn't in the echo chamber or wasn't in the echo chamber wasn't that surprised by what has happened. And I think that's worth talking about as well, because I think an echo chamber, which is essentially a self-reinforcing world of people who agree with you or think like you, has grown up in many of the circles of power, including, I would say, civil society, for many, many years. And I think it's reinforced then by the way in which we consume media or engage with media, but also on communications. So, and the truth is that actually we have an increasingly fractured societies. If you look at the US, if you look at Ireland, if you look at the UK, like, where income inequality and people feeling disenfranchised. And when they're offered, somebody like Trump basically broke the rules. You know, he offered, he presented himself as a movement, not a campaign. It wasn't an election campaign. He talked about it being a movement. And he offered an alternative that actually resonated with a significant percentage of the population who felt very, very disenfranchised and outside of the kind of that elite world that has grown up or has come about. And the same with Brexit. You know, there's a lot of angst about polling and all of that, but in actual fact, it wasn't that much of a surprise for anybody who was on the ground in communities who were dealing with, you know, very systemic austerity and unemployment. But of course, then the hope in that is that there was the alternative in the form of, for example, in the US, the form of Bernie Sanders, has offered real alternative hope, and it was quite clear that actually it was working. As in, there was a huge engagement with and huge support from a significant percentage of the population for the alternative vision that Bernie Sanders offered. And I think I've talked a lot to the Bernie Sanders campaign people and learnt a lot from them. And there was a couple of lessons worth kind of, I think, reflecting on for us as civil society. And one is that they got out on the ground, they engaged with real people. They didn't talk about volunteers, they talked about people who were willing to work. And it turned out, actually, that there was hundreds and thousands of people across the US who were prepared to put their time and energy into making the Bernie Sanders campaign work from the bottom up. And what they were really looking for was an opportunity to do that, as opposed to being told what to think or told what to say. And I think then the other, I suppose, kind of factor that is very relevant is the role technology has come to play in all of our lives. I mean, technology is changing and has changed the rules of the game. The way in which digital kind of revolution has organized, changed the way we organize, we communicate, the way in which we meet each other, the way in which we consume information is being used for good and bad. And I think we saw very clearly, particularly in the Trump campaign, the way in which it was used for bad, basically, and the way in which information was manipulated. But I kind of want, I suppose kind of then I want to just kind of finish up, because I know I've only have 5 minutes, which is actually really hard to get everything into 5 minutes. I want to talk about what we're doing here in Ireland. So Uplift is a people-powered campaigning community, and one of the reasons why, I suppose there's a number of assumptions behind Uplift. We came about 2.5 years ago. There's 170,000 people across Ireland that are now part of the Uplift movement, and it's all about how do you actually create the conditions for people to take coordinated action on progressive issues, to campaign and to change the things that they want to change. And there's a number of assumptions underpinning what the Uplift community is about. And one is that the people are not apathetic. The people that are our communities, our families, our workplaces, our lives are inherently political. And what's missing is very often the opportunity to do something and to take the action that people, so instead of shouting at the television or at Facebook pages, that there's an opportunity, a credible opportunity to actually take that frustration or that hope or that energy to work for a change. The other assumption is that there is a critical mass of people with progressive values, and there was research done a number of years ago in the UK which showed that actually our neighbours are more progressive than we give them credit for. And that what happens is, in a world where there's such kind of, I suppose, kind of a dominance of a particular narrative about the world around us, that we often stay quiet about. We assume people don't want to see change, or we assume people don't share our views about asylum seekers, equality, these things, so we don't talk about it. And one story that when in one of our first major campaigns was when the refugee crisis was happening, and the government said they were going to only accept 600 people from the eastern kind of, from that part of the world who were trying to get to Europe. And the Irish people basically, through the Uplift campaign, got together and said, actually, do you know what, we're going to fight this. And they started pledging beds and houses, and we had a huge campaign that was very, very short. But I always remember my mother, who lives down in West Clare, saying to me on the phone that one of the things that people did was they went to their local famine graves and had a minute's silence, and there was something like 30 of those across Ireland. There was a huge one here in Dublin. And she said, I never knew Peggy over the road felt the same way I did about asylum seekers. And Mary Hayes up the road, she also turned up as well. And I realised that these are people in this small community who never knew that they all felt the same way, and they had these feelings about, rights for people and basic dignity. And I said, that is Uplift in action. And the more we can build it, the more we can grow it, the more we can, I suppose, create the conditions for people to be visible and to connect with each other and to feel powerful. Then we can hold decision makers to account and engage with the work of the political system to make sure that they make better decisions in all of our interests.